Like the video. Thumb up the video. This is a House of Consciousness production with special guests, Professor Kaba, Hiawatha Kamina, aka Professor Booker T. Coleman. Peace and Black Power. Welcome to another House of Consciousness TV, where we document our story live on videotape. What we have here before us today, brothers and sisters, is a powerful brother. He goes by the name of Booker T. Coleman. Some of y'all know the brother by Brother Kaba. What's your full name, brother?
Kaba, Hiawatha Kamine.
Okay, beautiful. Before we get into the body of your lecture dealing with culture in the brain, talk to me about your name. What made you change your name? Because I know you by Brother Booker T.
Yeah, oh yeah. And I stayed that way up until 2010. But I was always leaning towards correcting my name, because I call it correcting my name, not changing.
Okay, got you.
And I always I was really fully motivated in the 70s with Roots.
Okay.
When I watched what happened to Kunta Kinte to become Toby. And psychologically, I always said Toby must become Kunta Kinte from my own spiritual perspective.
Right.
And my father, coming from Tuskegee, Alabama, Booker T. Sr., me Booker T. Jr., it wasn't easy, and that's why I don't jump on brothers and sisters who, because for me, the reason why I changed my name was, as you know, traveling through the community talking about what has happened to us, the atrocities, the ma'afa that has happened to us, this terroristic disaster. Speaking of all the horrible things, I just had a problem speaking of the horrors, but still allowing the brand of this terrorist to stay on me. And
right.
To me, that's the name.
Right.
So it's hard, it was hard, and it became harder and harder in time to present myself to our people with the brand of the enslaver. But there was a human side to it, and that's why I understand how some folk may be a little funny about correcting their names also. Because it's something you grew up in, you become comfortable in it, you have all your celebrations, you have your love affairs, you graduate, you do all the things in life with this name. It's on all of your papers. And now all of a sudden you're going to have to rearrange this. But my desire to rearrange it was stronger than my need to hold on to it. And it became more difficult. I did a presentation at the Asar Set community in Philadelphia on Germantown Avenue. And there was this really great family that was there. Mother, father, and children. And after the presentation, the brother came up to me and he said, "Brother, man, I'm feeling your presentation." He said, "There's just one thing I can't handle about you." And he said, "That's your name. When are you going to get rid of the slave master's brand?" Right. And this was probably maybe 2001, 2002. And when he said that, that began the clock that began to, it's on the countdown. It was countdown. Well, it was always there from the days of Roots. But when that brother said that to me, something, for whatever reason, and sometimes in life it happens, where whatever borough you live, or I don't know how other states do it, and folk that will be watching, I don't know how they do it, but in the Bronx, I went to the Bronx courthouse, I got my papers, I filled them out, and I
add in the papers and all that?
Well, yeah, that comes later, because the judge has to approve it. Right. The first time my name wasn't approved, because I had an unk.
Oh, man.
And basically, you have to have letters that any general typewriter or computer can type. There's no unk on the computer, at least general ones.
Right.
So I had to. So it was denied first. He explained it to me. I pulled the unk off, and then just put the name back. And within 2 days, it was approved. Then it went through the process, and then you go through having it advertised in 2 newspapers. That's probably the most expensive. When I did it, they told me put away $300. That's what it would cost. The great majority of that, one newspaper charged me, I think, $150, and another newspaper charged me like $70. It was a $50 fee. to correct the name. The newspaper is going to be the most expensive.
Okay.
And you do it, it stays in there for a week. You bring evidence, and the newspaper gives you evidence also that they have advertised that name correction. You bring it back to the courthouse, it goes through its process, and they call you. On June 10th, 2002, I was a born-again African.
Beautiful.
And I went there,
Beautiful.
and they told me from now on, Booker T. Coleman Jr. no longer exists. Kaba Hiawatha Kamene is now in existence. So my birthday, I have two birthdays, November 16th and May 10th. And it was a Friday.
Okay, I want you to look the camera out there and talk to our family out there and let them know what qualifies you to speak on these certain issues like dealing with the Ma'afa, dealing with Melanin, dealing with the Dogon. What qualifies you to do that? Give them your credentials, my brother.
Well, bottom line to me is I'm an African in search of my roots. And I'm sovereign. And I don't need no court to tell me that. It came into my mind I was sovereign. And if I say I'm sovereign, I'm sovereign. It don't make a difference how many papers are in front of me. And I have a right by a creator to find out who I am. And I have a right, having been impacted by Professor John Henry Clark at a very young age, 12 and a half, in the 7th grade, going into the 8th grade, to be able to search and to share my findings. And basically that's what I've done. I'm New York City Board of Education. I graduated. Some people call it retirement. I call it graduation. Because now I'm doing what I was born to do. I'm now truly commencing my life. And 31 years, 3 months, and 15 days, the amount of time I spent in the Board of Ed. A little bit more than that overall, but I get credit as it relates to the Board of Ed. I am a professor in the Black Studies Department at State University, New York, and New Paltz. But all that I just told you, my schooling, my master's degrees, none of that to me is important. What's important is that I'm a brother who is attempting to carry the legacy of people such as Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass and Dr. Khalid Abdul Muhammad and Huey P. Newton and all the others that have come before us. Fannie Lou Hamer, Shashi McIntyre, John Henry Clark, Dr. Ben. We could do libation right here on those that came before us. I claim the right as a human being in this day to do what is necessary to support our people, our community, and to explain to folk right off the bat, don't believe a word I say. I'm not saying anything I say, I don't say for you to believe. I'm not trying to persuade you or anyone else. I'm only trying to, in the best way possible, make us think as a people, because there is a story that has been put out there. And Dr. Wade Nobles tells us that power is the ability to define someone's reality and to have that person accept that definition as if it were their own. And something has been told to us and to the world about us that is just not true. For many different reasons, psychological in nature or however you want to look at it, the world and some of us and many of us have bought into this story. And I'm here to say that there needs to be a paradigm shift. And a paradigm shift means that you have gone along a paradigm, you've gone along a way of living, a way of thinking, a way of doing. You've become comfortable and it's become your reality. Now we got to shift, because the life that you've been living is an untruth. It doesn't follow ma'at, balance, reciprocity, and righteousness. It does the earth damage. Not just human beings damage, it does the earth damage, it does the water damage, it does the earth and the cosmology damage. And we have to make certain corrections in our thoughts and in our actions. And I don't blame anybody for the condition that we find ourselves in, because I take full responsibility for it. Because when you blame somebody else for the condition you find yourself in, you give them permission. You ask permission for them to get you out. But in giving them that ability to get you out, you also give them the ability to keep you in. But when you accept full responsibility for all things you find yourself in, I can do what I believe is right, as our brother Malcolm said, by any means necessary. And so the discussion is not between myself and peoples of European descent. In fact, I tell them, mind your business. You ain't got nothing to do with this. But you didn't do anything. I'm in this position because I am in this position. I am fully responsible. I know what happened. I'm not trying to say I'm cloudy on that. I know how it happened. But realistically speaking, as human entities on the planet, we have to accept responsibility for the position we find ourselves in, because I grew up in a home where a lot of folk, I did not grow up necessarily with heavy jazz in my house. I grew up with heavy blues in my house. And I grew up listening to Billie Holiday. Billie Holiday was my mother's favorite performer, and Sam Cooke. And my mother used to put her album on every Sunday after church. And she didn't make me have to listen to everything, but she said, Skip, that's my nickname, I want you to hear this. And she used to play a song by Billie Holiday and say, Mama may have and Papa may have, but God bless the child that got his own. And as black folk, there's another gospel. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. And as African people, having been pulled away from our family, the continent, we grew up as a motherless child. And with that, your mama may have, your papa may have, but the Creator blesses the child that has its own. I'm not arguing anymore about who put me in this position. If you fall into a pit, you can spend your time complaining about who threw you in, but not one moment is going to get you out. I'd rather spend our creative energies getting out the pit than complaining about it. And when I get out the pit, it ain't even about paying nobody back, because they're not that important in my life. We have to get ourselves together. We have to get our economic system together, our political system, our educational system together. We have to get our spiritual systems together. We have to get our sociological systems together. For us to even spend one moment on them is a moment we're not spending on us. And so I need to be very clear as I approach this, because I am not, you can pay attention to people two ways, negatively and positively. But either way, you're paying attention to them. And when you're paying attention to them, then you're not paying attention to yourself. We have to get ourselves together. We have to save the planet. That's the destiny of peoples of African descent in this diaspora who accept and embrace the truth as we see it, as it stands through scientific research.
Another young brother, as I hear you speak, brother, I got the brother's vision right there in my head. He go by the name of Brother Polite.
Yes, man. Okay.
He was just talking about the same thing you just said.
All right.
You just said it differently.
Yes.
But it's on the same page.
Wow, you should need to put that two together. You need to edit those two pieces together so the community can see like minds.
The Jewish people have what they call the Holocaust. We came up with a word that says the Ma'afa. The first time I heard that word, I remember I was in the UAM listening to Dr. Naeem Akbar. And when he broke down what is the Ma'afa, I was like, wow, that right there is deep. So explain to our viewers out there, the younger people, I know a lot of our people do know what it is, but we're talking about the youth coming up now when they hear the words like the Ma'afa, because I use the word all the time when I'm in front of my pictures and I'm teaching. So explain to the people out there, what is the Ma'afa? What does that really mean?
From what I see, the word itself is a Kiswahili word. And it means terroristic disaster. Ma'afa. M-A-A-F-A. Ma'afa. Terroristic disaster. And there's so many different ways that it could be explained and defined. But being with young people, I do a presentation I call The Best of the Best. And only the best of the best could have survived. And what I try to do with young people is I try to bring them back into a certain idea, a concept. And what I do is I place them in their community, wherever it may be. And they're playing, boys and girls, and the adults are off in the distance. They can see the elders in the distance, and the elders, the grandparents, they're there, and mother and father are in the fields, they're working, they're in the barbershop, they're all over doing what they're supposed to do. And the children are young and they're playing, 5, 6, 7, 8, Some of the older ones are off working with the elders as apprentices, and they're learning and they're in school. And they're enjoying themselves and just having a good time. They're throwing the ball and they're chasing each other. They're playing tag and all the things that young people do. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a group of people come, don't look anything like anybody that they've ever seen before. Can't conceptualize who these people are. They grab them and they beat them, they knock them to the ground. In the distance, the young people are watching the elders in the community being shot and killed. They're hearing mothers and grandmothers being yanked by their cornrows and their hair and being knocked down to the ground and being shot. And well, they don't really know what that is because they don't know what a gun is. But they see them dropping and not moving anymore. And these children, these young people who were once playing and having a good time and having been taught the oral tradition of their communities and being taught the language in which they came up in, all of a sudden now they're being spoken to in a language, in a tongue that they don't even know what it means. And every time they try to figure out what this individual is saying, they smack them to the ground, beat them with sticks. They have these things, they just ram them. And then all of a sudden they put these manacles, these things on their arm. They never saw anything like this before because in their community nobody ever has these things on. But all of a sudden they realize they can't move their hands. They're pulled up and pushed and made to walk. They're hungry, forget food. They see the other people that grab them, they're eating and they're thirsty. They've been walking now for hours and hours becomes days and nights, and this is happening constantly. They're tired, but if they dare get up to complain or say that they're tired, they can't say they're tired because they're not speaking the same. They're beat again, tortured, and for day and for night and for day and for night, for quite a while, they're beaten. Some of them even see some of their young sisters being raped by the men that have grabbed these individuals that don't look nothing like them. They're brought across for days and for nights, for days, and then all of a sudden they're thrown into these dungeons. They're put on top of each other. All of a sudden they're there and they feel something liquid and they smell something. All of a sudden they realize the person that's on top of them is actually going to the bathroom on them because they cannot go anyplace. They're not fed, they're beaten. They continue to see themselves being raped, and even some of the young boys are raped themselves. They're going through these experiences, and everything that they remembered from that community is no longer happening in their lives, and their new experience, their new paradigm, their new outline, their new way of living now is changing in their mind, and they have to, I'm speaking on this level, but they're literally having to recircuit their brains. Because in order for them to survive, they have to be able to do things that will help them survive. They're kept in these dungeons for weeks, don't know what's going on, they're beaten, they're hurt. They're even with people who look like them, but they don't speak the same language, so even they that look alike cannot speak to each other. We're talking about a terroristic disaster now. I don't want us to forget this. Because all of the children that I'm talking about are the children that could be in the Harlems or in the Detroits or in the South Sides of Chicago or in the Comptons or in the Bronx. Okay, that's who I'm talking about here. So don't lose sight that this could be us, but just at another time and place. They're brought up out of these dungeons and they're put into these huge situations that they've seen smaller ones along the lakes that they lived in or in the ponds, and they used to even make some out of sticks. But they're put in these, what we're going to call boats, and they're brought down in the bottom, and now they're on the water. And they're brought up every so often and hosed down. The guy has this thing, they just hose them down with water and then knock them back down into the pit. We're talking about a terroristic disaster. They're brought across and then they get into this climate area. They're brought into this area and they're beaten. They are made to change. Their names are no longer what it was. So when the guy said, "What's your name, boy?" He says, "Kunta Kinte." He said, "No, your name is Toby." "No, my name is Kunta Kinte," because you don't understand. You don't even understand what this man is saying. He beat him. Every time he say the name Kunta Kinte, he get beat. No, Toby. Kunta Kinte, Toby. Pretty soon, survival kicks in. He rewires his brain and says, well, maybe he won't hit me again if I just say Toby. So he said, "What's your name, nigga?" "Toby." "Oh, okay." Survival. Tortured, hurt badly, hard to say, but sold. Now, with all that I have said, from the moment this young man and this young woman were captured from their community, only the best of the best could have survived that travel across. The others died out.
That's right.
Only the best of the best, physically, mentally, and spiritually, could have survived. When they were brought down and thrown into the dungeons, out of that best, only the best of the best could have survived. When they were brought up and put on the ships and brought over into what we call the Caribbean area, only the best of the best could have survived. Only the best of the best, mentally, physically, and spiritually. The terroristic disaster, this Ma'afa, no matter what they did, they were able to overcome it. Despite and in spite of that, they still overcame all those things and still they rose. They were able to survive. Only the best of the best could have done that. This terroristic disaster, this Ma'afa, this experience of coming from a very loving and accepting and respectful and understanding community now. Your whole world has turned. Your paradigm has been shifted. The way in which you're thinking now is not about what I'm going to do tomorrow to enjoy myself in my environment. Now you're saying, what can possibly happen to me again? And yes, it did get worse. They were then sold. And that young man and that young woman, Kunta Kinte and Ahine, sister and brother, now are separated. Ahine is brought to an island that's called a rich port, Puerto Rico.
You said Ahine?
Ahine is the girl.
Okay.
Okay, and a boy, brother and sister. Ahine is sold to Puerto Rico, the plantation in Puerto Rico. Because remember, we're only dealing with the Spaniards now. British ain't in this now.
Not yet.
Dutch ain't here yet. Okay? Portuguese are on the other side of the world because the world has been split in half. So you don't see the Portuguese here except in the southern part of America known as Brazil. So you're dealing with Spaniards now. You're dealing with Europeans. Not the people of the Caribbean we know today. You're talking about Europeans who at one time, before they got into Spain, these were Germans, Visigoths and Vandals. You see why they got that name, Vandal. Kunta Kinte is sold to this coastline. Ahine brings forward children who are sold to various islands and Quisqueya, which we today is combined island of the Dominican Republic and Haiti. Sold to St. Lucia, sold to Virgin Islands, sold to Aruba. Kunta Kinte has his family, and his family goes throughout the South. They're being sold. And for hundreds of years, they remain in this state of what we call forced enslavement, imprisoned, kidnapped, held in bondage against their will. Terroristic disaster. The lives that they were used to no longer. The morals that they had, the values that they had, the interests that they had, the principles that they had all changed. And these individuals who clutched the Bible in one hand, clutched the devil's hand in the other, and they merged the two together. And that became a religious system that they put on black folk, made them follow it. Black folk so smart, black folk brought a faith system from Africa, and they superimposed this European religion over their African belief system. Spanish-speaking Africans called it Santeria, Espiritualismo, when they blended it with the Native American Taino. In the French-speaking Caribbean, they called it Voodoo. In Brazil, they called it Candomblé. In the English-speaking islands, they called it Obia. And in the southern states, they called it the Baptist Church. Yeah, the Baptist Church is very close to Santeria when you study the ritual act. That's why the Black Baptists are so different from European Baptists, because their practice is very, very African. Whether they want to escape it or not is African. Just a call and response. Just the dancing of the minister up on the dais is example of it. So when you talk about a terroristic disaster, you have these African people who are going to fight and going to create an industrial system in this country through their free labor. They are going to create an economic system that to this date, with now in the present day, 2012, people from all over the world will come here to be able to benefit from what the indigenous Africans of America did, who were brought here and created this industrial revolution. Not only did Africans bring in the industrial revolution that we know of in the late 1800s, 1900s, up until that time, black folk were the industrial revolution. They were the machines that built this country. Immigrants did not build this country. They came here to be able to benefit
That's right.
from what was already here.
That's right.
And the immigrants were brought here in 1870. See, a lot of people think of immigration and Ellis Island as going into the early 20th century, the 1900s. That's not true. Immigration started 1870, and it started in 1870 because when Europeans saw what black folk were doing after the so-called Emancipation Proclamation, they knew it would only be a couple of decades before black folk ruled America. Because remember, black folk built America, so who else to inherit it but the builders? Europeans didn't know the machines. They didn't know how to do that. You got a man named Granville T. Woods. Granville T. Woods is the father of the trains. Transportation, communication are two cornerstones. They're the twins of industrial revolution, because once you have a product, you gotta talk about it, which is communication, and then you gotta send it places, which is transportation. Transportation and communication. If you look at all of the inventions that we're going through, whether it's the iPad, whether it's the computer, whether it's new cars, whether it's electric cars, everything is rooted in transportation and communication. When you hear people talking about the green movement is dealing with a cleaner and better way to improve what? Transportation and communication. That's what this is. And black folk coming to America built the communication system and built the transportation system of this country. That's hidden colors right there. They try to get you, but once you know your history, they can't do that to you. That's why Malcolm said history is what we need to understand. This terroristic disaster wasn't only physical, it was mental, because it denied us access to know our rightful place. So when they started bringing them sick, poor, hungry Europeans to America, it was so that they would take the jobs that African people were supposed to. And what did they do? They built an organization that would keep black folk in fear of moving forward while they allowed European immigrants to come in here. And when enough European immigrants came in here, they became part of the organization that would attempt to instill fear in black folk, and that's called the the Ku Klux Klan.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I'm saying? I want to make this very clear. The fear invested into black people not to succeed, and the immigration movement bringing Europeans in to take the jobs. And then what did these European immigrants do? They built organizations within organizations that would make sure they could get the jobs and black folk wouldn't, and those are called the unions.
Well, Brother Booker T, I always say that the first fear came about when they would take the black woman and they would hang the black woman upside down, carrying the fruit of life in her womb,
Yes.
and they would gather all what they call bucks, the black man.
Yeah.
And they would get the biggest, strongest black man and make them watch and make other pregnant black women watch so that they can draw fear into the unborn baby. So they're drilling of fear, and their babies will be born automatically in fear.
Yes.
Can you imagine a black woman carrying the fruit of life in her womb, and she see them cutting the penis off of another black man? What do you think is going in her mind that's going to touch the unborn baby? This is what they have done for countless years. Yes, sir.
Absolutely. And, and in a more sophisticated manner, they continue to do it up to this day.
Exactly. Now what I want to do is move right along.
But if we can just put a finale on this.
On that one.
When you ask about a terroristic disaster, it is important that the steps that I went through, imagine what happened to us.
That's right. I was picturing it in my mind.
Imagine, feel that.
You know what I was looking at? I was looking at Farewell Uncle Tom as you was going through the breakdown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In that entire period, if you remember when we did that piece on the Nubian warriors, remember we did that piece a couple years back? And remember I told you the story about I Believe I Can Fly?
That's right.
And you put it in the... Okay, I'd like you to do that again, brother.
Right.
But this piece that I'm talking about, with everything that we've been through, we still had a dream.
Right.
And so on one level, recognize what has happened to us negatively. But at the same time, the fact that we could be in this room doing this is cause for celebration in the highest spiritual form.
Right.
Because no matter what they did, we still came back stronger. Everything they did to us, we came back stronger. They don't understand that we, as an African people in this diaspora, but specifically in the United States of America, with due respect to all Africans coming to this country, my recommendation, whether you speak Spanish, whether you speak French, whether you speak Dutch, whether you speak whatever language you speak, Portuguese, when you come to America, one of the first things I did whenever I travel in any other community, whenever I travel anywhere in the world, whether it was Holland, London, Vienna, wherever, the first thing I asked for is an audience with the African community. First with the African elders, and then with the community. And I asked permission as formality, out of respect, understanding that I'm walking your hallowed ground that your ancestors did. When people come to this country, you need to first unite yourself with the African community here. I don't care where you're from, whether it's the Caribbean, Africa, Central South America, wherever you may be. You unite yourself with us. Because the only way you can survive is to know what we know.
That is correct.
Because the reason why you left your country is because you didn't understand where you were living. You come here, you will not survive. Not that we will be your adversary.
Right.
But if you don't know the history of this country, if you don't know the history of indigenous people, if you don't know the history of black folk, you will not survive. You may thrive for a while.
But you know what, Professor? A lot of our African brothers and sisters come here thinking that they know more than me and you.
Yes.
We've been here our whole life.
Yes.
And they thinking that they know more than me and you. When we try to tell them something, they don't want to hear none of that.
It is true. And they, and many of us, unfortunately, have certain views towards them.
That is correct.
Because I've had children tell me, oh, them Africans on the street, but what do you think you are?
That's right.
Those Africans. What they have done to Africans in Africa before they come here is they tell them, don't associate with them African Americans. And what they tell us, African poor people, but the first thing you know, they'd be stealing from you. So those forces that wish to separate us use the Willie Lynch syndrome.
But are we a different people today, though, from our African brothers and sisters on the continent?
We are semantics. Malcolm said English is the language of liars. We have had an experience. They have had an experience. We, as Dr. Joy DeGree talks about, she talks about the post-traumatic, she calls it slave syndrome. Brothers and sisters on the continent are post-traumatic colonial syndrome. So that in a sense our experiences are different, but our spirits are intrinsically and extrinsically bound with each other. And what makes the problem so bad is when the spirits fight and not the minds and the body. African brothers from Ghana, look, when they shot Amadou Diallo, they didn't say this is an affluent West African.
That's right.
When they rammed that stick up the butt of Abner Louima, they did not say this is a Haitian, affluent, working hard individual. When they looked at Amadou, when they looked at Trayvon, when they looked at Abner, when they looked at Rodney King, they said those are niggas.
That's exactly what they said. And I'm going to ask you about that word later on. But right
I
now,
have no problem with that word because I know the origin of it.
Oh,
And I think it's important that we understand.
brother, we had Professor James Small sitting right where you at 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And he said the same exact thing.
I don't have a problem with
You don't have no problem with
and,
the word.
and I tell a story behind it too, because I'm a storyteller, I'm a teacher.
Okay, let's go
And,
right
and
into
you know, when
it.
you're a
Let's go
black
right
teacher,
there.
you get to...
Let's go right into the word nigga because you know
when you're working with the...
we've been dealing with that word for a long, damn near a year out there on the street up 125th Street. But let me say this before I be remiss. The white man, yes, he's responsible for our condition, but we are responsible for our own liberation. So I do agree with my brother, Professor Booker T. We have to pull ourselves up. We have to look at ourselves today and say, why are we still in the condition that we are in? Because we choose to be there. We are responsible for our liberation, but he's responsible for our condition. So with that, we need to take steps and move forward. So Brother Booker T.
And be clear on history.
Yes.
And then make decisions from the options you have, from the knowledge you have of the history. And that's what I try to tell the young people. Because I want them to understand, don't go out there and say that I give you permission to use that word. Follow what I'm about to tell you. Mm-hmm. Okay. 1800s.
You're dealing with nigga.
Well, yeah, we're going to deal with that. But first, I got to walk you into it.
Okay, go ahead.
Because without walking us into it, there's a history that you got to get into to understand it. And then make your decisions from the options from this story I'm about to tell.
All right.
A Russian woman by the name of Helene Blavatsky.
Go and look that up, y'all. Don't believe nothing he say.
No, don't believe. Please, not a word.
That's
don't
right.
believe a word I say. Study this for yourself. Come to Blavatsky, Helene Blavatsky. She wrote a book, Isis Unveiled. She wrote another 2-volume book, very interesting. But she was a woman of European descent that went to the East, in particular Tibet, to study the Eastern spiritual systems.
Right.
She studies the symbols. Let me tell you, a picture speaks 1,000 words.
Yes, sir.
Okay? Brother M. Fudishi taught us that a symbol speaks 1,000 pictures. Think about what I'm saying. A picture speaks 1,000 words.
Right.
A symbol speaks 1,000 pictures. So when you're looking at the Ankh that Brother Sarnetta has, when you're looking at the falcon head that Sarnetta has, that symbolizes thousands of things. But it's all according to where your mind is and your knowledge of wisdom, understanding, that makes a difference as to what you're going to see when you look at that. She took these symbols, realizing the importance. Of course, all these symbols come from Africa.
Right.
Right? But she finds them in Tibet, Buddhism. She brings them back. Coming up into the late 1800s, going into the 1900s, she brings one in particular that captures the imagination of a young lieutenant in the German army. And he studies that symbol and he begins to realize the importance of that symbol that is speaking thousands and thousands of pictures. This man inherently, internally, he is simply an evil man. He is evil from head top to shoe stop. It is what was called a Gramadan, which is called the yin and the yang in Asia, which is a symbol throughout all ancient societies. The Germans took this symbol and they made it the symbol of the organization that they were going to do some of the evilest deeds that has been done in modern day history, putting aside the Ma'afa. This is Europe, this is white on white crime now. It is called the Svastika. Shvatsa meaning black and Tika meaning symbol, the black symbol, the perfect black. You gotta get to this. He takes this symbol and he makes it the very symbol of everything evil he's going to do. From the murdering of the first German Africans, which is the first to die in the Holocaust, because the Africans were the first to die in Hitler's hands. The Jews came later.
I didn't know that. I thought that was coming to get
black
us
folk.
after that.
No, black folk were the first to go.
Oh, okay.
Because remember, Du Bois, William E.B. Du Bois, many of the prominent African Americans, A. Philip Randolph, many prominent African Americans encouraged African Americans to fight in World War I. Because they said if we fight in World War I, we'll have a right to demand our rights. Britain took their British Africans, Kenya, Ghana, Nigeria. They went to the Caribbean, Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad. France went to Cote d'Ivoire, and they went to Senegal and all the French-speaking countries. Came to the Caribbean, Haiti, St. Lucia, Martinique, brought Africa. And they brought all these Africans, along with African Americans coming from America, into the European theater to fight, although we stayed very short. War ended in 1919, basically. But these Africans that went there, they were loved by the European people. They were treated better. Now, mind you, they're outnumbered, so they're no fear to the European people, but
right.
They were so valiant, they were so powerful. These were Nubian warriors. And they were fighting for something that they believed that would benefit them back where they came from. But they started loving this acceptance so much in Europe, they never went back. And they stayed in Europe. You got this guy named Adolf Hitler, he's looking at this, and he's saying, no, not only did they whip our behinds, and it's because of black people that we lost World War I, they will never admit that, but black folk fighting in World War I, they were fighting tooth and nail for their freedom. And they thought the European theater would give them their freedom in the other places that they were going to go back to. But they loved it so much they stayed. They married, they had children. And Hitler, oh man, he detested that. Okay? But this is something that you have to understand in terms of what's happening in Europe. And then what's going to happen is that people of Jewish faith now, Europeans who are being tortured by Hitler, are now being tortured, but everywhere they go, they see this symbol, this swastika, everywhere they go. And this swastika begins to become etched indelibly in their minds as a horrible thing. Mind you, this is a sacred symbol in Tibet. It is a sacred symbol in the ancient world. It means the continuation of life. It's a spiral galaxy. It is the yin, the yang. It is the male, the female. It is the twinness of the Dogon. It is the story of the duality of life in the universe. Okay? It is gender in the Kabbalion. It's holy. But this dirty man with this dirty mind influencing other dirty people took a sacred symbol and made it dirty. And so now if I should even walk into a room and draw that symbol on a board with people of Jewish faith in that room, they're not even going to deal.
That's right.
That is an evil system, and you're anti-Semitic, and you hate Jews, and you're not a human being, because they're looking at this symbol.
Right.
But it's a sacred symbol in its history.
I know where you're going.
You know where I'm going?
Yeah.
Let's walk into the room now.
Break it down.
The word Inger, N-G-R, is a sacred word in Africa. When the Punic Wars took place, give or take 200-something BC, and Africans came upon these North Africans, okay, including Hannibal, but we're going to leave Hannibal because he's going to come down the road. He's not the first Punic War.
Right.
They're going to want to know who are you? What's your name? And so these Africans, being African, gave them the name that they wanted those lowly Europeans to see themselves. So they said, my name is Negus Negusti, King of Kings, Lord of Lords. Neter, you can take the G and the R and interchange it. Neter, I'm God. Unger, Naga, If you go to India, Naga means snake.
Right. That's
Okay?
right.
If you go to Africa, you'll see that the word nake means, look at what nake is. N-A-K-E, nake, the sound. But what did they do?
Asia.
They put the snake, the symbol, what's called a determinative, they put a symbol of the snake in front of nake, and now we have the word snake. But nake is the word. The symbol that we call an S is a picture of a snake.
Right.
But S, nake, snake is the word we come down with.
Right. If you go to Asia, Naga
Yes.
is God.
Yes.
It means God in
Yes.
Asia.
Yes. Vietnam. Even go way over.
Right.
God, spirit. That is to be blessed. Romans, not having a language, because to have a language you have to have a script. There is no Roman script.
Right.
Roman script is Greek script. There's no Greek script. Greek script is African script. Greek don't have a script.
When you say script, what do you mean script?
Letters that you can pronounce your thoughts. A language specifically, Dr. Ivan Van Sertima teaches us this. In order to have a language, you must have a script. English isn't a language. It uses Greek script. Spanish is not a language. It comes off of something else because you use Greek script. A, B, C, D, all those letters really, come out of the Medunete.
That's right.
Okay? Dr. Walter Williams teaches us this. Kwasi Milton teaches us this. When you look at the Rosetta Stone, that third is not classical Greek. It's another scriptic language that came out of Africa that the Greeks adopted. It's like if we were to write something and have three languages. Top we have the King's English, Standard American English, and then Ebonics. They're all the same language, they're just different representations of the same language. Well, that's what the Rosetta Stone is. They try to make classical Greek an original classical language. It's not. Greek don't have a language. Think about it. They learned everything in science and math and everything from African people. How can you have letters that describe something that you didn't know where you came from? It can't be. You can't have a script if what you write is something foreign to your thoughts.
So let me ask you.
I'm still on the story.
Right.
But go ahead.
So when the white man take our mothers and take our babies and lynch them because a brother by the name of, he goes by Brother Larry or Professor Larry, and he always say the last word our ancestors heard was the word nigger. Kill that nigger. Lynch that nigger.
Yes.
Burn
Yes.
that nigger.
Yes. Yes.
So we need to stay away from that word nigger. And he says this all day, every day.
Okay. But now let's go back. Let's go back. Remember my first story about the slot sticker.
That's right.
Now let's get back into this word.
There you go.
The Romans didn't have a word for nigger. So what they did is they took the word and put it into their vocabulary. And so negro became a description of a people, but described it as the complexion of the people. Negro. Coming off the Greek, inger, because they had the inger also. Coming off into that, you have this, even when you look at the Greeks have the word Gnostic. It's the N, the T, and the C. So this concept of ng was always related to black people, because Gnostic means knowledge and wisdom. Okay? So, from the Romans and the Western civilization, this word negro is in the Latinness that is going to now come into Europe. It's going to come into Spain, it's going to come into Italy, it's going to come into Romania, it's going to come into Portugal, it's going to come into France. And this word negro, that was a good word, a word for God, King of Kings, is now placed in a language. It is now going to be transferred after all of these. The Spaniards are going to bring this word to America, negro, as they bring Africans here. The British don't have a word, because they don't even have a language, but they're going to start to look, and they're going to start to say, negro, black people, people we enslave. They are going to, in their deepest psychopathicness, mindset is going to now take this word that represented a good thing, a God thing, a spirit thing, a king thing. They're now going to take this word and create a social condition. And this word is going to be a social condition. It's going to be shortened from negro, nigger. And the word nigger is going to be placed on the people who the Europeans enslaved, but it's going to be more than just a name for a people. It's going to be the name of the social condition that these people are placed in. There were schools down south that had no black children. But if you acted up, they had a chair in the corner, and that was called the nigger chair. And that's where they made you sit, in the nigger chair, because you're acting like a nigger. Acting like a nigger. How can you act like a nigger? If you are black, that's not an action. That is a definition of an individual. But they made the word nigger into a social. Get that nigger meant black person. So just as that word, just as that symbol of the Ramadan was a sacred symbol to some people, it became dirty in the mind of a dirty man by the name of Adolf Hitler. Just like Unger was a beautiful word that described a beautiful people, because of dirty, filthy white supremacists, it was made into a bad social condition. So that every time someone of Jewish faith sees a swastika, they don't care. Don't tell me nothing about no good stuff.
That's right. They just remember the pain that associated with it.
So go back to Professor Larry.
Ovens. Right, yeah.
So when black folk heard the last word come out their mouth is get that nigger, burn that nigger, hang that nigger, just like Jews can't stand to see a swastika, black people can't stand to hear the word nigger.
Right.
But neither know the history of the word.
Beautiful.
So my thing is, I tell young people, now don't go, I'm going to deny I ever said anything. So don't go out there and say, Brother Kaba said you can call each other nigger.
That's right.
I don't care how you spell it. Because you have to understand our elders who watched people die with that word.
What you are simply saying is just go and do the history on it.
That's
don't
all
do the research.
And don't believe a word I say. Go
There
do
you
your
go.
history yourself.
And I'm with you on that.
But see, my key is, for me, I'm just about making us think. I'm not even trying to get us out the box. I'm trying to make us realize the box doesn't even exist. Because if I step out the box and you still in it, you can't see me because you're in the box. If we collapse the sides of the box, realizing that it never existed in the first place, we can see each other. And I don't care what you think about what I'm saying.
Right.
Melanin. What is melanin? This is a question that we must ask because many of us don't know what it is. The white man says melanin is insignificant. Is he telling the truth?
Melanin, simply put, is a molecule. Okay? It's a molecule.
Right.
Okay?
I see.
But to understand melanin, what you have to do is that you have to understand what makes up the molecule. Okay? And what you're looking at is, this is called a melanocyte. A melanocyte is a melanin cell. It's a cell made up of this molecule. Okay? This is a melanocyte, a cell, a melanin cell. Melanin is found inside what's called a melanosome. A melanosome is a granule. It is what makes up the cell. Okay? Now, this little dot here is melanin. This is the melanocyte of a person probably of Eurasian descent. A black person, this black dot would just about cover the whole melanosome. Full.
Right.
The melanosome would be full of melanin. Melanin is made up of carbon. It is made up mostly of carbon. Because as you can see here, you can see the hydrogen and the oxygen. But you see, when you go back into science, this is why I tell our children and our people, you got to study. We really have to study it. We are people of the book. We are people of knowledge and wisdom. And so the periodic table is very important. With the 92, and now they have 116. They used to have 109 when I was in school. Elements or atoms. And atoms, there's only one atom that exists. Dr. Gabriel Yibo, brilliant Nigerian scholar, talks of, there's only one melanin. And even in cosmology, there's only one universe. There's only one thing the whole universe is made up of. And what you're looking at is that when you look at the periodic table of elements, it runs by numbers. And number 1 is hydrogen. Everything is hydrogen. All other atoms and elements are made up of joined hydrogen atoms. So number 2 would be helium. Number 3 would be lithium. Number 6 is carbon. In other words, carbon is 6 pieces of hydrogen. Okay, simply put. That's why we got to study. Because there's a lot in our history and culture, but we don't teach it from that perspective. We teach it very abstractly. We bore the children, and then they don't want to hear. When I teach it from this perspective, it is part of African history to understand this. But African history is human history. Okay. Because there's only one race on the planet. And that's the human race. And that race was nurtured, sustained, born, fed, educated, cultured, civilized in Africa. And then after the Africans got their show together, then they took it on the road. So that you have this molecule, and then you have the cell. That is the melanin cell, which is melanocyte. Now you ask yourself, and this is particularly very important, particularly for now, and that becomes, why is melanin black? And the brother, Carol Barnes, is where I'm getting this information from, talks about it and compares it as an analogy to a battery. And what he says is that our bodies are like a battery that receive light and heat energy. When we receive light and heat energy, it recharges our battery. When we eat the proper foods, recharges. When we drink the proper drinks, it recharges our battery. When we are in the sun, in particular, it really recharges our battery. Listen to the proper music, associate with the right people, living the type of life that humans should live, it recharges your battery. So, melanin is black because you have 4 very important atoms or elements on our planet. You have hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and carbon. You can put 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen together, have H2O. You can put 2 parts hydrogen, 2 parts oxygen, have hydrogen peroxide. But you can't put, of hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, you can't put no more than 4 atoms together. Anything beyond 4 will not stick. When you include carbon, carbon is the glue of the universe. Carbon is what makes all of the billions, if not trillions, of molecules and things that are made up of the planet. Carbon is what is called the mothership. Malachi Andrews, brilliant brother out in California, called melanin life in motion. He called it the mothership. That is what makes everything stick. Carbon is black. That's why when we go to a store, we say, is that lettuce organic? All lettuce is organic. You cannot buy organic lettuce. You cannot buy organic fruit. You cannot buy organic vegetables. If it has life, it has assimilated carbon. If it assimilated carbon, it is organic. When you go to a health food restaurant, the question is not, is it organic? The question is, did you put pesticides on this? So when they say organic, they are trying to make you think that you can have inorganic lettuce. You can't. Just like I passed this store, it said it's organic cleaners. I don't know what organic cleaners could be.
Right. They're coming up with all kinds of stuff.
Because they figure if you think it's organic, it's all right. But there's no way it could be organic, because organic means living. You have inorganic and organic. Organic has assimilated carbon. But even inorganic has assimilated carbon.
Right.
But it has there are certain things that are activated, and there are certain things that are not activated, but they still have brought in carbon, because that's what the life system is. So, the important thing to understand is that why melanin is black, because it's like a calorie. But I wanted to show you what it looked like so that you could get an understanding of what it is that we're talking about, because we have to see it. Okay? And here inside This is where you have things that you're looking at here, such as tyrosinase. These are the enzymes that really are what's really very important. Anytime you have ASE on the end of anything, it means that it's an enzyme. So you have tyrosinase, okay, you have peroxidase, you have melanin inside of this granule. Very important to understand this. By the way, I got DVDs. I'll give you my contact so you can understand this. And then again, I'm just showing you another idea of what it looks like as a molecule. And then again, the battery. So melanin, as Dr. Richard King, who was in town just a few weeks ago, it was out of his mouth was the first time in my life that I ever heard anybody say anything about melanin.
Yeah.
Okay.
He was the first one I ever heard it.
Is that right? And he was the first. This is 1982 First World Alliance. And what he said was to us, to the group that was in First World, he said, oh, okay, because he could tell that I wasn't the only one that had never heard this word before. I mean, this is why I give Richard King a great deal of credit. I really give Dr. King a lot of credit for what he did. Just like Dr. Ben brought a whole new Egypt to us, a new Kemet to us. Dr. Clark gave us an entire sense of self-concept. There are certain things, Dr. Ivan Van Sertima is irreplaceable in what he's done for us as a people. His journals alone are powerful. But what he did for us as it relates to opening our eyes to Africans in America, before him I never even thought of that concept.
What role does the brain have on melanin? What role does the brain play with melanin?
Well, there are different types of melanin, so to speak, and it's all according to where you find it in the body. This part that we're talking about, this is skin melanin. Skin is the largest organ on our body. When you get inside of your body, you have something known as eumelanin, EU melanin, M-E-L-A-N-I-N, and you have pheomelanin. And according to what your structure, internal structure is, determines how you're going to produce melanin in all your organs and glands of your body. That's eumelanin, pheomelanin, P-H-E-O melanin. In your brain, you got something known as neuromelanin. Okay? This is what creates complexion. U and pheomelanin determines the strength of your organs, your muscles, your glands. But neuromelanin impacts your thinking power. It impacts the way in which you think. Neuromelanin, in every part of the brain, you have concepts. Neuromelanin basically is melanin in the neurons. Neurons are brain cells. You're born with billions of them. Okay? For our young people, from the moment you are conceived until about 4 or 5 years of age, something very important happens. And this is why it's so important, the impact that we have on our young people, as parents, grandparents, as community members. What the brain does with the assistance of neuromelanin, under the proper conditions, eating right, thinking right, a child who is exposed to an extremely negative environment, a child that is exposed to a very positive environment, a loving environment, supportive environment, neurons, you get billions of them. Your neuron is structured so that there's 3 parts to your neurons. And again, I'm going back to melanin now. Neuromelanin has a very important role in what's happening. Neuromelanin is involved in everything that I'm telling you right now. You have a soma, which is the body of the neuron. And inside you have that centerpiece in there. In front of it you have dendrites. They're like trees, branches that reach out, they branch out. Coming down out of the soma or the neuron body, you have something known as an axon, A-X-O-N. And at the end you have something that looks like little twigs at the end of the axon. Everything that you experience throughout your life is sent via neuron to neuron. They're sent from the axon to the dendron, and it's sent. It's like, remember when we used to play that post office where I would whisper something in your ear. You'd pass it all the way around until the last person, and the object was to see if it was the same message I gave you.
Right.
Well, that's what neurons do all day long. This is why you can sit there and talk to somebody and they don't know a word you say, because their neurons are not processing your information. So they can come up with a whole different story about what they experienced. You say, that's not even what I said. Right. You didn't understand, and that's because of the neurons. So, what's important is not how many neurons you have, because by 5 years of age, many children lose 1/3 of their neurons. But the idea is, it's not important how many neurons you have, it's the connections that you made that's important. So that if a child grows up in a positive, loving, respectful environment, that child's neurons, the messages that are going to be sent are going to create what's called neural pathways. Melanin, or neuromelanin, is what's going to strengthen that. It's what's going to make those neurons, those messages go straight. It's going to help you understand dignity and respect and values and interests and principles. But if a child is seeing you say one thing about values, but practicing another thing about values, then there's going to be a separate message, and those neural pathways are not going to be strong. And so they're going to come up with different alternatives of ways of thinking. And the reason why I say that is because when Africans went into the northern climate and were impacted by the Ice Age, their environment became very hostile. Their pineal gland, you have in your brain a limbic system. And the limbic system is important because the limbic system basically is responsible for 3 major things, but one in particular. In your limbic system of the brain, which is in the middle of your brain, you have the brain stem, then on top of the brain stem is the limbic system, on top of that is the neocortex. In the limbic system, you have something known as the ventricular system. And for those that listen to Dr. King speak, you hear him speak a lot about the third ventricle. The ventricular system, there's 2 lateral ventricles. The 2 lateral ventricles come down and is joined by a third ventricle. The third ventricle comes down and creates a fourth ventricle. In your third ventricle, you have 3 very important glands. Glands give off liquids, hormones. You have the pineal gland, responsible for your spiritual growth. You have your pituitary body, responsible for your physical growth. And you have your optic thalami, which is responsible for your emotional growth. A pineal gland responsible for your spiritual growth. A healthy pineal gland looks like a grape. A person that lives a life of positivity, they're positive, respectful, loving, honorable. Their pineal gland looks like a grape. An unhealthy pineal gland looks like a raisin. It's dried up, it's hard, it's had its liquids drawn out. So that when Africans went into the northern climate and was impacted by the Ice Age for 60,000 years, they began to act in a way that we would call animalistic. They lost that loving feeling, so to speak. Their pineal gland became calcified. When they returned back to the southern lands after the ice had melted, they brought back this hostile feeling towards everything and anyone they came in contact with. And so we are now living in a world that, as it relates to the brain, if you just look at television and you observe how people act, when you look at what's happening politically, and don't need to name names or parties or anything like that, but when you see how parties act, where one party is willing to destroy the entire country just so this black man won't be elected president, which he's going to be elected again anyway, so I don't see what they...
That's right.
But they'll do anything at all to make sure this man never ever sits on the throne of the Prof or the White House. You have to look at them and say, these people are willing not only to throw the baby out, but they're going to throw the bathtub out. Not just the bath water, they're throwing the whole thing out. Because their mind cannot deal with the fact that a man of African descent can run things well. And then to have a wife who is equally if not in certain ways, more intelligent than him. Because remember, Michelle Obama was President Obama's mentor when he first went to study. And then you have the Queen Mother, her mother. That is such an African traditional White House. When you look at the way it's structured, you got the two girls.
Right.
You know, you've got Queen Mother, who is the mother's mother. You have the Waret Nesut Hemet. Don't call her queen. Queen means king's whore. The Waret Nesut Hemet, who is the female counterpart to the male Nesut Biti, or Para, or Pharaoh. It's set up. Forget the fact that back in ancient Egypt, the place where the leaders administered was called the White House. They don't even know that it used to be called the White House. But if you read the poem by Listerville Middleton, he'll tell you that on the origins of things. Mm-hmm. So that in the brain, melanin is what channels. It's that liquid that creates what we call cerebrospinal fluid. In these ventricles, you have things known as the choroid plexus. And again, I say we need to study. Because if anything that I'm saying is not understood by anybody, I would blame your 5th grade science teacher. Because you should know this in 5th grade.
They're not smarter than the 5th grade.
All right,
huh?
I want to get through.
So I just want you to understand.
These right here.
Well, brother, I can
Because-
do, you know, I mean, we're dealing with whole subjects that
I know. Powerful too, man. I hope y'all out there getting this, man. Get your pen, get your paper, and just begin to write this information down. Now we're gonna be dealing with a few subjects. Now I would like for you, my brother, Professor, is to help us understand more about the Dogon.
Dogon.
The Dogon, you say, is our people.
Our people.
How did they see God, and how did they see the creation story?
The Dogon and the creation story. Professor Booker T is dealing with high science, brothers and sisters. You are going to love this information here.
How did they see the creation story?
They saw the creation story the same way, almost a retelling of the Shabaka stone, which is the Kemetic story in Egypt. Mm-hmm. They had the pneumo, okay? The pneumo is interchangeable with the word water. And so you had the waters of the universe, and that's what the universe is. The universe is waters. And then you had Amma. Amma is the word. And the word is what calls things into being. And so what they said was, in their creation story, is that Numu brought forward Amma. So what you're talking about is, out of the universe, you're going to have a structure that's going to bring order and arrangement. And that is why in many nations worldwide, but specifically in Africa, the naming ceremony was so important. Because when you call someone's name, you call them into being. They exist. And that is why one of the greatest punishments that you could get was that people would no longer speak your name. So that the word, even for us, when you look at the hip-hop generation, when you look at the jele, the word that is eminent, that's why I tell young people, be careful what you speak, because once it comes out your mouth, you can't pull it back. It's out there to be dealt with, and there's a very good chance it's going to hover around you since you said it. So that they saw, the Dogon saw this universe of Numo, water. And then you had Amma, but you also had twins. You literally had 4 pairs of twins. The same way in the Shabaka stone in Egypt, you had 4 twins. One of the twins, out of the 8, is who Dr. Marimba Ani calls Yurugu, who represents the incomplete one. In Egypt or Kemet, the nature was Seton or Setesh. He's the incomplete one. He is the sterile one. He is the impotent one. He is the one that cannot produce. He represents the desert. He represents anything. It's a male energy that dominates, destroys. It's psychopathic in nature, but it has its place in society because Africans understood in a very genius way You cannot know good if you don't know what is not good. The thing is, you got to put what's not good when not good belongs and live the righteous and good path. So their creation story was telling us that our bodies, made of water, hydrogen, going back to hydrogen, inside of us there is a spirit that allows us to call ourselves into being. So our words that we speak really define who we are as a people. It tells you who you are. So if you have the medunefer, the good word, then you represent the good word. If you speak the bad word, even in the Congolese story of creation, they have the same thing. You have the ancestor that is good, you have the elder that is good, and then you have the elder that is not good that will become an ancestor that you do not want to call upon. And so the creation story is a story of us. What we create is who we are. And the same way the universe came into being and Amma called forward its words is the same thing we are. And if somebody should come down here who is objective to the earth, observe us, see how we act, what would they say about us? Us as a human family. What would they say about us? And then would you blame them for wanting to blow the planet up because we would only bring harm to the other cosmic planets? Look at how we're acting. Look at how we're acting. Look at how we're treating each other. Look at the inequality between men and women. See, from my perspective, personally, in studying Africa, to even speak of women's equality goes against African nature. Because it's the same word. Because from an African universal perspective, Dr. Ben teaches us, in order to have a God, you must have a goddess. So there's no way that you could even consider in your philosophy women's equality, because in doing that, you are assuming there's something that would be women's inequality. Any society that would hold its women captive is a society that shall never and will never move forward. And a society that even stands still is falling, because societies must always be moving ahead. And this is why the Pharaoh had the crook and the flail, because he represented the pastor, the good shepherd. This is where they get the good shepherd from. Because the crook keeps the sheep in line and the flail keeps everybody moving forward. And that's what a great leader is supposed to do. Supposed to keep everybody ordered and arranged and moving forward in a straight pattern.
What did the Dogon know about astronomy?
They knew a lot of things
that we didn't know.
Well, the concept is this. They were aware. There was a team, Griot and Dieterling, went to Dogon land in the 30s. The Hogan, or the leader of this particular group, because there are a number of groups there. Some live up on the cliff and some live down. So there's Dogon are a large group. Not a huge group, but a big group. Right off the bend of the Niger River, about 210, give or take, kilometers from the bend of the Niger River in Mali. And the Hogan name was Ogatameli. And over time Ogatameli began to trust Dieterling and Griot and began to share information. He started to draw things in the sand. His other scientists and priests and agriculturalists would draw things in the sand. And what they came to realize, I'm speaking of these two French people, that the Dogon had information of an invisible star that even the modern world didn't see until 1971. The scientific community became aware of it in the mid-1800s. But they only supposed certain things because of the nature of what the bigger star, and I'm speaking about Sirius, that's located in the constellation Canis Major, or the Great Dog. It's up in the haunch of the constellation, Sirius. There's Sirius A, there's Sirius B, there's Sirius C. Sirius A is a big star, and you can see it. In fact, in the southeast heavens, in the winter, if you looked up and you looked at the three belts of Orion's belt,
Right.
and then you look down to the left and down, the brightest star in the heaven, that's Sirius A. But Sirius A was like wobbling, and they knew that a star wouldn't wobble like that unless it was impacted by something else, but they just didn't know what it was. But they knew there had to have been something out there. The Dogon knew that there was a tiny star. They called it Kizi Uzi, the littlest of things. They called it Potolo because for everything of the heavens they had something on the earth. And the Po was a grain that they grew that was the smallest grain that they had. It was called Potolo. Tolo means star. Potolo, the star of Po. And since they figured this star was the smallest thing up there, they named it after the smallest grain that they had. So they call it Potolo or Kizi Uzi. And what they celebrated every 60 years, although it took 50 years for this small star, Sirius B, Potolo, to go around Sirius A, they celebrated every 60 years what they called the Sigi ceremony. S-I-G-U-I. That's how they spell it. Sigi ceremony, every 60 years. They would build a Kanaga mask, K-A-N-A-G-A, a Kanaga mask, to celebrate this revolution every 60 years. They drew in the sand the 60-year complex movement of this little star all around, and they were exact to the date that science today says it happened. The same way in which they rotated and drew that picture is the same way the Dogon drew it in the sand. 60 years, one Kanaga mask. Griot and Dieterling happened to be there during one of these 60-year cycles. They went to the ceremony, and at the end of the ceremony, they would bring the Kanaga mask and put it on a very special seat in a very special room that would end that ceremony. When Griot and Dieterling walked into the room, they were telling them, this is very special because there's 12 and this is the last, we're going to have to build a new room for the next ceremony in 60 years because they only put 12 masks in each room. So they put the Kanaga mask down. But the thing is that there were 12 masks in the room. Now if you multiply 12 times 60, okay, you come up with 720. If you come up with 720, that means that they have celebrated this little teeny star for 720 years. If you celebrate if you subtract 720 from 1930, let's say, you're going back to the Emperor Mansa Musa. You're going back to the 1300s. Mm-hmm. That's heavy, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
It's not heavy enough because Ogatabelli told Dieterling and Griot, we got two other room of 12 masks. Mm-hmm. Now you're dealing with 36 times 60. So how long did they know this little star existed that the modern world didn't even see until 1971? And now you're dealing with it. Now there's a lot of things people say. Carl Sagan was the one that said, I don't know how they know it, all I know is they shouldn't know it. That was his response. But that's how deep, as intelligent as he was. But J.A. Rogers says that the most intelligent scientist becomes an absolute fool when it comes to race. When Brother had Like It Is, there were no other programs on the air.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying?
I remember.
And so hungry for this information, we watched this TV show. Didn't even have the VCR in the beginning, so we couldn't even tape it. We had to be there live to watch it. Mm-hmm. From 40 years ago to now, we have the House of Consciousness, we have Blog Talk Radio, we have cable. It's not that bad. The brother is irreplaceable. For the time he lived in history, nobody was doing what that brother was doing.
That's right.
His honor, his respect, the love is all there. But we have almost like as black folk, we have what Dr. Clark used to call Messiah complex. And we think that if somebody dies, that's it. Well, what's going to happen? Well, what's going to happen? We're going to go on.
Clark used to say, bury the man, continue to plan.
That's it. And he said, if that man or woman developed the right kind of plan, it just takes us to keep going with it. And so what I'm telling to the community is, don't worry, Dr. King was right. Good news and bad news. We all going to get to the promised land. That's good news.
Right.
Bad news is a lot of us ain't going to make it.
That's right.
Because if we still thinking about them shackle sneakers by Adidas.
You know about that.
Oh yeah, so they faced that me the first time it came out.
That's right.
They faced the pictures of that. And I wrote back to them something Dr. Clark said. I'm surprised you surprised. Because we are slaves to sneakers.
That's right.
We'll kill each other over a pair of sneakers to get online to get a pair of sneakers.
And with that, I'm going to show you exactly what he's talking about. There's going to be a clip coming where you're going to see brothers getting ready to fight the police, getting ready to just want to die just to get a pair of sneakers. You remember that scene out there, Brother Sutek? So we're going to go to the videotape right quick. Hit the pause. Okay. Beautiful, beautiful, brother. I'm glad we chose the right brother to do this. Okay, going into the Dogon. We know that there's many levels, brother, but I want to just go with 4 levels of the Dogon philosophical consciousness. How did they live? Number 1. What did they think about Europeans? 3. How did they teach their children? And number 4, how did they see the woman? So let's start with number 1 first. How did they live? How did the Dogons live?
Well, they had a very harsh life. You know, they had a life that was very harsh. The climate and the weather is very dry in that area. And they lived a very harsh life. They did not have great deals of wealth, materially speaking, but they had a depth of accomplishment that goes beyond our understanding, because they did not think like we think. See, remember going back to the brain, the messages from neuron to neuron. There is an environment that we live in. We all live in this environment. We're all thinking about paying the rent. We're thinking about buying food. We're thinking about where our young people go to school, and books. And so our neuron to neuron relationship, axon to dendrite, is very different from another place that wouldn't have that type of thoughts. You go back to a community where the people don't worry about paying the rent. Their house is their house. They live there. They would not understand how we pay or how we take demand, supply and demand. Okay? We have money. To live here, we take things and give to people. That axon to dendrite makes us think about how much do we have here. You see? Whereas if you go someplace else where they don't have that relationship, they have a